Hi everyone, we'll get started now in a moment or two. We're just waiting for our streaming services to go live. Okay, excellent. I've just got the thumbs up that everything's streaming, which is great. So hi everyone, thanks very much for joining. My name's Conor O'Neill. I'm head of product here in Nearform. I'd really like to welcome you to Decoded. If you haven't been on before, this is a web series that's focused on putting technology into context, exploring real life challenges around software development and hopefully looking to the future of software development as well. Just a few quick notes, basic housekeeping. So obviously, it's a webinar, everyone's on mute except us, but that doesn't mean to say we don't want to hear from you. We really do. So, you've got that Q&A box or that Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. Please make use of it throughout the webinar as points come up or questions come up, pop them in there, and we'll definitely get to them at the end. We're really interested in hearing what you have to say. And also, this is being recorded. It is also being live streamed. It's been live streamed onto YouTube. I think ideally onto LinkedIn as well. And it'll be available for playback later on YouTube and basically on nearform.com. So that's, I suppose, the housekeeping. Today, what are we talking about? We're going to talk about DevOps and particularly this promise of DevOps for technical teams and organizations. And, we've come a very long way since the early days. And have we come a very long way since the early days? What's coming next? To help us get through all of that, we've got two, absolute thought leaders on the subject. Many of you will be very familiar with our technical director and open source ledge bag, Matteo Collina. And I'm also delighted to welcome, Matteo, delivery architect, DevOps wizard, and now EV owner, David Gonzalez to the table.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you both here. Let's just get into it, and we'll start with, I suppose, the obvious thing, which is the title of the webinar. I mean, it's called The Promise of DevOps. So, what did they promise? Who is they? And when did they promise all of this? I'll just throw it out to you to get us going.
Hi, everybody. So, one of the things that it's when talking about DevOps, I always try to go back to the roots. And a lot of people would say that DevOps is, scripting on steroids and scripting against the cloud. And it involves a lot of, it involves a lot of, I don't know, like some level of wizardry coding and so on. And however, I would, when talking about DevOps and thinking about DevOps, I would like to go back to 2001 and to the Agile Manifesto. The first principle of the Agile Manifesto is our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So the first pillar of Agile is continuous delivery, which is essentially what DevOps is all about. So it's DevOps is how we achieve this level of continuous delivery through our practice of building on software. Now, what is the key part of this is that, we were talking about continuous delivery back in 2001, and we still, it's still more or less, the time frame has been shortened quite a bit if you are on the good side of the practice. So back then it was probably 1 year or 6 months or months between deploys. Then it moved to months. Then it moves to sprints. It moves down to weeks, and we are multiple times a day. So there is a lot of things.
But that's so interesting that it's 20 years. I mean, I think most people, when they think DevOps, they might think 7, maybe 10, but like that's 20 years. Like
this has been 20 years in the making. Okay, it's not. Yeah. It's a long. It doesn't say, it says continuous delivery. Okay, so we want to do continuous delivery. That's the key part of it. We want to continuously deliver software. Now, what's the reality, David?
Well, yeah, I mean, like my opinion is slightly different, but pretty much different in a kind of in a tangent. But so basically, I think the inflection point here on the technical standpoint was when Docker became mainstream. So you went from every single application in the world has its own deployment manual, deployment guide, where you have like a number of steps and then you execute the steps and hope for the application to be in production. And I remember one day at 4 a.m. in the morning, I was working for an insurance company here in Ireland, and we did the deployments out of hours because the chances of something going bad were huge. And I remember one guy who was doing the deployment and I was building the software. Basically, he was copying and pasting from a Word document into a terminal the instructions. And I was like, there has to be something better than this, because you need to deploy your application, you need to patch your configuration, keep the updates up to date. But then Docker got invented. And I think that actually sent a torpedo into the kind of not Agile Manifesto, but the Agile procedures itself and all the continuous delivery of the software, because then you could really do continuous delivery. And then the cherry on top of the cake came with Kubernetes and orchestration in general. So my point on the promises of DevOps is that DevOps is promising better software with better quality and lower, kind of a shorter delivery time. But the reality to me is that where DevOps is shining is at consistency. So do one thing and repeat it until it stops working. But the reality is now deploying any application in the world, it becomes as simple as running a Docker container, regardless of what your application is. So that's from a technical standpoint.
But that's incredibly interesting. So does that mean that, was there a kind of a bunch of years there where people were talking about it, people who were kind of trying it, maybe you had some success with the likes of Cloud Foundry and so on, but for the rest of us, it was Docker and it was Kubernetes. That was the sort of the inflection point.
Yeah, that's kind of my opinion, to be honest. And it's what I've seen. Like, for example, I work as a Java developer in the past, and 3 or 4 places where I work with continuous delivery, they did continuous delivery in different ways. So what's the point on having the same technology, which is Java, and delivering the application into production in 3 or 4 different ways? I mean, it's completely like non-standard and painful. So yeah.
And is there a, we were saying continuous delivery, and I know, Matteo, you talked about the sort of the squeezing down of the time scales of all of that. But even now, I assume a lot of this stuff depends on the size of your business and the type of business you are, and how continuous is.
I would like to bring back to a slightly different take here.
Okay.
So the problem is, so there is the promise of DevOps, which is this magical continuous delivery, and then there is the grim reality.
Grim reality.
The grim reality. Okay. Like, I'm sorry to say this. I wanted to be as much as positive as I can, but there are entire organizations of hundreds, thousands of developers that do not focus on deliver software.
Yeah,
they focus on doing story points.
Yeah,
that is, if your basic unit of measurements of how much successful a team is are story points, then you have a problem. And these, I'm sorry, I'm going to swing back here, because it doesn't really matter how many times we can put code in production, if or how quick we can deliver, so how quick we can deploy, if what we deploy makes no sense.
Yeah.
And
yes.
you know, it is the typical agile team or agile whatever team develop software. So they do sprint planning, where they align when they put some story points into stories. So they do some grooming before, so there are stories to do. So the team decides how big the stories are. And then this team decides what's the done thing, how to call a story done. And they self-evaluate how a story is, when a story is done. So, and then the agile coaches or whatever evaluate, or the management evaluates the team on the amount of story points that they finished in a week or in a sprint. Now, the problem here is all of this is well said and done if the people don't tend to gamify the system. The point is that we are very susceptible to gamification, and people start keeping, gamifying, playing games here. So they see, oh, the people that get promoted are the people doing the most number of story points. So instead of actually considering something done, I know that thing has a bug, but I'm not going to fix the bug unless somebody's pointing me to it, so that later on I can do more story point next week.
Yep.
Or the next sprint. They start doing this type of game, essentially bringing the actual progress of the team to a halt. They might even deploy multiple times a day, okay? Yes. But they're not doing any. They're not doing any delivery, and deploying multiple times a day is not helping them. Okay, it's essentially completely detached. So, saying that you are just taking some DevOps magic into something and then a team will fly, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, there is a much more fundamental problem in here. So I can set up a delivery pipeline in under 2 hours. Any software that you want, I can set up a Kubernetes cluster or any other orchestration. I'm going to look obsessed with Kubernetes, which I am, but for other reasons. But I can set that up in less than 2 hours. I do that with my students, and I think some of you are here, and you might not me, in less than 2 hours, from GitHub into a cluster, working with a DNS and everything in just under 2 hours.
That's impressive.
But many of our customers will take months to set up a delivery pipeline because of their processes and their kind of ways of working and their security requirements, which is fine. That's where DevOps is. That's the problem of DevOps. It's not technological. It's more an organizational problem. But even before that, what is the value of a team working on sprints when you can do continuous delivery? And let me elaborate on that. Back in the days, I used to work in financial services, and we had a sprint every 2 weeks because putting something into production required somebody a morning punching servers, get the application in one server, get the application on another server. But now it's as simple as one click. You merge a pull request, 20 seconds later, it's in the cluster on development. People are happy. 20 seconds later, it's in QA, and then 20 seconds later, it's in production. So what's the point on working on sprints and these sort of ceremonies that are actually going to hinder your process? So you do a sprint planning, retrospective, you do a lot of, kind of grooming and things like that. Wouldn't it be better because now you have the ability and the technical capacity to deliver software as it's ready? So if you have a bug, you actually can deliver the bug as soon as it's fixed. Why do you group the work in artificial kind of arbitrary slots of time? I'm pretty sure that 2 weeks is a convention, but I'm pretty sure as well that many companies will work better in 3 weeks, in 1 week, or even in a continuous delivery sort of pipeline, Kanban style. You have one task, work on the task, deliver the task. That way you avoid people, kind of expanding the work until the end of the sprint, because everybody knows that the human brain works that way. So if you have 2 weeks to complete the task, it's going to take you 1 week and 6 days, and then 1 day of real work. So that's another thinking that I want.
But so you've kind of, it's like there's two related problems you've highlighted there. So obviously, Matteo, you talked about the gamification, but there's also this being slaves to the rules. So what's important in people's minds is we're ticking boxes and we're checking things off, rather than the intent, which is surely to deliver good software and fix, solve customer problems is surely your intent, not, do story points. So the idea that DevOps can come in, the promise, and solve your problems is nonsense if you're coming at it from, with the sort of wrong mentality.
When you have a hammer, everything is a nail. So that's the problem. You need to leave the hammer aside and then take a different tool.
But if that is the case, if people are looking for this, we often use on this webinar, we often use silver bullet, magic, a little bit of magic. Flip it around then, like what could people be doing who are considering DevOps? Because again, we often forget when we're talking about stuff, I can't think of a better word than stuff on Decoded. We often forget a lot of customers are well behind in terms of their adoption of certain things. So we might be talking about 20 years of DevOps, but there's no way all the companies in the world are doing DevOps. But so let's say they're looking at this and saying, I really like that idea of being able to do continuous delivery. So what should their starting point be? I suppose is my question. What's the attitude they should be coming
from my point of view? The first problem comes from management, and the attitude is like there is a lot of people that evaluate software delivery based on number of commits per day, number of lines of code per day, to some extent even number of story points per sprint, and especially because the number of story points per sprint are usually not matched with a good done condition, okay? So if your condition of done is it's deployed in production, that's a good way of measuring those. But if you're not considering done as it's in production, then it's not done. Okay, your lead time from doing something and pushing it out is months usually. Even if you are saying we are doing agile, we are doing continuous delivery or whatever, if you don't deploy every day, or if you don't deploy, if you don't deploy incrementally, and if you consider the work of a development team done early, that's for me, that's the first gigantic problem of DevOps. As I want to do more DevOps, is they're typically not ready for this shift in thinking. Okay, like if I want to get something out of my investment, I need to start thinking of how shortening the feedback cycle, shortening the development time, the time it takes to deploy, to get actual user on the new features. It's you can see like a company like GitHub between February and March, they have been doing a massive overhaul of their GitHub Action system, which is what everybody's using these days for CI. A lot of companies are using these days for CI, and they were shipping very important and possibly breaking changes because of the huge amount of security attacks that they were facing. Day by day, week by week, if not day by day, with a set of, a change and a set of blog posts explaining the change, documentation, and all those things at a scale that, some other bigger, like we are talking about, you're deploying some code that's going to impact all the repos on a, as a normal scale. And they are able to ship it in 3, 4, 5 days of a cycle. It's totally doable. It's just that you need to change your mindset.
You know what is failing there? So like you have the GitHub is working that way and it works fantastic for them. So somebody read the article, somebody who is the CTO, CEO, or one of the top-level executives in an organization, and then suddenly it resonates with them. It's solving the problems that they have in their organization. But the reality is it won't work because of the organizational constraints that they have. I am a super big fan of the term 2 pizza size team. So your functional unit should be fed and have some leftover because everybody loves pizza with 2 pizzas in a given sitting. If your team is bigger than that, it's going to fail. And if your team does not have enough people to own everything they do, it's going to fail as well. So that means you need to have security experts, you need to have DevOps, you need to have developers, you need to have QA in that team. So that's like 4 or 5 people maximum with 2 pizzas. If you go over that, it's not going to work. You need to find another way of organizing your team. So if you want to do DevOps, you have to have small autonomous units that can carry a feature, a problem, a new shiny application and get it all the way into production, as Matteo said. If your organization is different than that, then what you need to do, in my opinion, and what I've seen working in many places, is embrace the SRE model, where you just assume you are not going to be able to have these A teams squads that are going to be able to take your application and make it lean and better and faster. But what you have is you have a platform, and then you have below that the SRE team, which are the ones that keep alive the platform with automation. Like that's the traditional operations, but on steroids. And then you have your development teams, which they don't need to even talk to the operations team because the operations team have objective parameters on how the platform is performing. Do I have enough RAM? Do I have enough CPU? Is there any security vulnerability in any of the Docker images that I'm deploying into production? And basically what happens is the SRE team onboards the new applications teams by just getting one member of the SRE team, dropping them into the application team to help them to deploy in the platform, get the constraints, get the culture, the tools that they use to deploy the application. But once the applications team have all the infrastructure, which is the domain-specific language for deploying applications in, let's say, Kubernetes as the shake of example and the most popular thing out there, nailed down and it's all set up, the SRE goes back to the SRE team to keep the platform alive, make the platform better, patch it, improve it. And then the application team itself autonomously will release new versions of the app, whereas the SRE team will make sure that the application will run. That has to happen after a shift in the paradigm. Instead of having a massive release guide, you have a declarative way of deploying an application, which is the manifest on Kubernetes or the task definition on ECS. And that gives you the possibility of then moving at the speed and at the scale, which is one of the biggest challenges. This cheap, fast, and good, you can only choose two. So here is the scale, speed, and cost. You have to choose two. So
I have two kind of questions about that immediately jump out at me. I suppose one is, does putting that SRE kind of in the team for a period of time, is a necessary part of that the team gets an understanding of what the SRE team is capable of or the platform is capable of, so that they're not designing for a scenario that doesn't exist?
It is necessary for 2 reasons. First reason that, and second reason, which in my opinion is more important, if you have 20 applications in your cluster, you want the 20 applications to look as similar as possible, and the only contact point of that is the SRE team. So if tomorrow night something is broken, I can get in and fix it without having to wake up the applications team.
But a follow-on that, and this is me playing devil's advocate, is
that's fine.
Is there a danger that over time we're just going back to the old model of we have these people over here who manage the infrastructure, and if we need a VM, it's going to take 6 months to get it provisioned?
There is no VM here.
I know, but that was the old model. So I'm just wondering if, let's say, we go beyond, or we start to go beyond Kubernetes, and now we have this SRE team who are the Kubernetes guys, and it's you want to do something that's not Kubernetes? Oh, I don't know if you're going to be allowed to do that.
Well, in that case, you have 2 options. First is, depending on the maturity of your team, you will have an expert embedded on the team. You obviously hire for what you need, not for what the book says. And second option is, you assume that you're going to need to have the prerequisites fulfilled before the team starts. Otherwise, it's going to be hindering them. And that's how I will go about that.
No.
It's tricky because my opinion is that Kubernetes is not the end destination of this journey.
Yes.
So it's just an intermediary. I think the end destination gets closer to Knative or serverless in particular. But one thing that Kubernetes brings, which is for me of an extreme value, is the declarative configuration of your infrastructure. So I want a queue, I want a database, I want like an application, click, give me a model with a template with the manifest, and then deploy that in the cluster. There are efforts going that way as well. So where you have the cluster API, where you can set up things in cloud and in other clusters by just creating Kubernetes objects. But we are still not there, so we need to work around that.
So that's a really important one for me. That you're not treating Kubernetes as the end point. We're all, this is like all tech. It continuously evolves and it continuously changes.
Yeah, correct.
But the declarative thing is that. Do you think that is for the foreseeable future, that is the best way of approaching these things?
I don't see other way, to be honest. And now some of the people seeing this video or this presentation will be like, oh, but CDK is not declarative. Well, it is. You're using an imperative language to generate a declarative set.
Well, it's like the approach with CDK is slightly different in the sense that it's still declarative. You define, so the key difference, depending, is not, so a lot of people consider declarative as a config file. That's not however, that's not the case. So a declarative way of reasoning is I write what I write in a file or a configuration or a program, the end state that I want to reach.
Yeah.
I'm not codifying a set of actions to reach that state.
Yeah, exactly.
I am specifying the state, and that's it. And then I leave some other machinery to, can be, I don't know, Terraform, or can be CDK, or can be, Kubernetes itself with the Helm and so on. I don't know. It's to figure out what to do with my...
How to get there.
How to get there. So I'm not saying how. I'm just telling what I want. Yeah. And then I leave the tool to figure it out. So the key difference between the previous generation of automation tools, Chef, Ansible, those trends, was that those tools were, a lot of them were imperative, like go this and execute a command of a fleet of machine. While with this level of automation is essentially like, yay, I just write a definition and then the system figured it out how to get there. Yes. Now, be careful that when you're doing some of those things, if the system does not know what to do, they often they can result to destroy everything and bringing everything up. So be very careful here, because it can be very disruptive, especially with Terraform and Terraform modules. Don't use them. I'm sorry. Just copy and fork. It's not a good thing to use them from the internet. I've learned it the hard way. But that is a fun story. There's a lot of fun stories to define there. Yeah.
You just brought a very interesting point, Matteo. And I used to talk about this with Alex Knoll quite a lot. Hello, Alex. I'm sure you're seeing this.
Hey, Alex.
So we tend to talk about developers and DevOps as of the same, but it's actually not the same. I will consider a DevOps as sort of a different type of architect than a software architect, more so than a developer. And let me explain you why. You cannot be a successful DevOps if you are unable to code. Like, you need to be able to read the application, understand the application, see what's going on, and then what's the best way to deploy the application. So many companies are like, oh yeah, sure, let's hire a DevOps engineer and solve our problems. Mm-hmm. The reality is it's really hard at the moment to hire good DevOps, DevOps as of somebody who can take your application from GitHub, improve it, because an application needs to be adapted to run on DevOps way. I posted a LinkedIn about that yesterday. Like, you need to build your application like if the carpet under the floor is going to be pulled and the application is going to fall, because then you will be able to run it on every single platform. that isn't happening a lot. I mean, I've seen many places where, oh yeah, let's run nodemon inside of a Docker container and let nodemon to restart the application. That is a very common thing. And it's like, why do you have a then? So my point is, if you want to succeed, you need not the best available talent, but somebody who understands, at the very least, the basics of security, the basics of operations, and the basics of development, being a master on at least of one of them. Because otherwise, what you end up is with the Homer Simpson car, with, you know, like one of those, I want a bit of everything, but then you don't have the ability to execute. And it's where you end up in a corner. So.
But that bit, and when we were chatting before about this, it didn't come up as much. And I noticed you've mentioned it multiple times now. You know, it's the old, do you think security is important? You know, answer 1 to 5. Of course, everybody says security is important, but it feels like we're now at a point where you can't do anything without security being front and center in all of this. And I know, David, back in, God, what are we talking? 2 years ago, you were involved in our DevSecOps initiative, and all of that work around there. So, you know, everything we've said so far today, you know, plus security, it seems to be like a really, really important aspect.
You have two ways of filling a bucket. The first way is making sure that the bucket does not have any holes, and you're buying a high quality bucket from a hardware store, and you know, you make sure that it's high grade plastic, or you know, something that it qualifies as a bucket. Or take one leaky bucket and patch the holes, right? So many companies are trying to patch the holes, and they don't even know that they have a bucket, because like, how many times I've been in a project where, oh yeah, we take security very serious, and then you have a crazy network diagram, you have a crazy, you know, security policy where you can't access certain things because you're going to steal information, and nobody does a code review on the application. So how can we get there, and how can we get out of there? So the way out of that is embedding security in the people who control the pipeline. So if I want the application to be secure, the first and foremost thing that I need to do is make the application secure, not the environment itself. Because nowadays, DevOps is not so much about the infrastructure, but rather more about the application running inside the infrastructure. So.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. I hadn't thought of it.
Well, it's called DevOps because it's a crossover between developers and operations. Now, that's the problem. Yeah. And a lot of people will not think about that. And I've seen a lot of folks coming to DevOps with not enough experience on the development side of things. And there is a significant part of of what DevOps means for a company. Like, you cannot be doing the DevOps role on a project if you don't know the language and the runtime that the application is being built upon. It's you can develop the automation for it, but you are not able to customize the application to run on your cloud. And at some point, you will need to do it. Like, let me make an example. It's in Node.js, you have the Node.js DNS stack is it goes to the kernel for every single time you want to do a lookup. This has some bad effect on Kubernetes DNS resolver. It's always DNS, by the way. But it can easily quickly saturate the internal DNS resolvers of Kubernetes. So you need to do a bunch of things to counteract that effect. One of those solutions is, to be honest, go to the query the DNS less, as much as it, you know, as much. Why are you querying the DNS so many times? Okay. And most of the time is because, I don't know, sockets are not being reused. You're not having keep alive set up, and a lot of other things that are very simple to fix. Yeah. But a lot of folks that are into, like some folks that are in SREs, in SRE team and so on, knows the runtime that they are monitoring very well. But others are, I'm just a DevOps. I'm not done. Look at the code. It's like,
Yeah, can you actually add a comment here? And another interesting side effect of that, if you want to know if the DevOps team is well coordinated with the apps team, do you know what I usually look when I get into a project? The first thing I try to fetch to know how well the system, like the team, it's playing together, dev and ops, the logs of the application. If it's an OJS application, I'll explain you why. If you're using Fastify, you write your handlers. None of the tutorials on the internet are logging things or using the Fastify logger. So you end up with an application which swallows the exceptions because then you throw in the handler and then Fastify will take the exception as it is and send back a 500. So all the error you see in the logs, it's a 500, unless you proactively log the error. And that happens because the ops team have not worked with the dev team to make sure that the logging and monitoring are in place. And also didn't work with security because if you see into OWASP top 10, I think it's the number 7 or 8 from 2017, it's insufficient logging and monitoring. So if you go into the application logs and you don't see any meaningful information in there to be able to rebuild a user journey, that indicates a very deep organizational problem in the company. So,
I would never have used a metric like that to connect from the quality of a log to the quality of an organization. That's a pretty deep insight into
well, it's logging is one of the most boring thing that everybody has to do and nobody does well, and it's just plain horrible.
Yeah. I remember
the situation is really horrible to some extent. Like as somebody that works on a logging,
I was just going to say, as author of the fastest Node.js logger out there,
I know I can say a thing or two about logging, and the grim reality of logging is it's grim. It's another grim place.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't log enough.
I remember a few months back in a customer project, I was asking for the logs and I asked a developer, can you add a line here wherever you do the pagination? I was actually working on other things, so otherwise I would have done it myself with, what is the offset that you are trying to get? And the guy was like, but that's just so stupid. Like, I mean, why do you want to know the offset? And I was like, I don't want to know the offset itself, but what I want to know is if this URL with an offset as a parameter costs a 500, I want to be able to identify in the logs when that happened and how that happened. So that's why I want to know exactly what's going on every single step. If you are not actually able to rebuild a user journey through your system, your logging system is broken. And that's a very good indicator of ops have not worked with application teams and security to make logging effective.
But that wasn't the point of DevOps?
Well, the point is, if you are a good DevOps, the good outcome is that your system is completely transparent from the monitoring point of view. You can go into CloudWatch, Datadog, or whatever monitoring tool you're using for your system, and in no less than 30 seconds, find the root cause of the problem. Not the detailed explanation, but know where to look for.
So, but that I was just having a smile to myself earlier on because this ties to it where you were talking about like Kubernetes and declarative, and I was there going, well, is that like a CXO in an organization saying they want to embrace DevOps? So they make a declarative statement about where they would like to be. And then it's up to the people in the organization to make that happen. But if they're able to tie that all the way down in a kind of a joined up fashion from logging through to the development organization, the DevOps organization, all the way up to delivery of features and therefore revenue, there's something very impactful and powerful, and bring us all the way back, I suppose, to the start of the Agile Manifesto and why it exists. And we're running fairly. I can't believe we've got through 40 minutes already. We're running right. Bloody hell! This is one of those ones where it's like, oh my God, we're nearly done on time. So if people have any more questions there, just pop them in the Q&A box as we kind of come towards the end. But as we do so, I know I'm going to ask you both for, I suppose, parting thoughts. Matteo, I believe there's a book you're a fan of that you want to tell us about.
Yes. So this is the book that you should read.
Yeah.
If you have doing anything in software and you have not read this book,
Call it out there, Matteo.
It's
Title
called
and author.
Accelerate, Building High-Scale Performing Technology Organizations from Nicole Forsgren.
Excellent.
So if you are doing anything with software and you are in a leadership position, this book is from 2018, I think, or 2000, I think it's 2018. You have been operating under at a lower bar that you could. This book is full of very good evidence on how you should run your team and your digital company.
So it's less opinion and more sort of data driven, is it?
It's data driven. So basically the book starts from data from surveys and from the part that are good practitioner of DevOps and Agile, and it draw practices from them. So essentially take a statistician approach to translate what is anecdotal experience and holistic data or holistic information about how to run a development team, a successful development team, and translate it. Okay, if you do those things, your team will accelerate by that amount. Like we can move this, like that's what it does. What she did. So it did by observation, and it's actually like it's phenomenal, to be honest. It's from my point of view, it's one of those like take this diagram. I hope you can see this diagram here.
Can't really, but go on, explain.
Not so much.
Here you go. Okay, so
I see a hockey stick.
Yeah. So essentially, you have the amount of time you want to. It tracks the amount of time it takes from a change to be thought and by the product owner and to being put in production. Okay, and that is the one of the key metrics. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other bit is the other key metrics are the change failure rate. So how much time you consider a change a failure, okay? And you need to rework the change.
Oh, okay.
And this is come because, the change, like for example, the change failure rate is, from my point of view, phenomenal. It's a phenomenal metric to track of teams. Because it's essentially you're saying that if you want to, I want to minimize the change failure rate, you are saying I want to minimize bugs. Now, it turns out that most teams spend most of the time squashing bugs and fixing bugs. So you are essentially putting your effort on quality and long-term sustainability of your product versus new features.
New features,
yeah. And this is actually, you can balance those and move the handles on those. You can accept a higher, failure rate, and
but you're measuring, which is the important.
But you are measuring, and you're not measuring story points. Sorry to be clear. Like again, back to the beginning. You're not measuring story points. So
the full story of story points gets me chuckling. Like you are trying to predict time, which is wrong given the Agile Manifesto, but that's what happens in every company. I want to know how long it's going to take me to build a feature, because that's money, and that's what companies are about, which is nothing wrong with that. But I'm not going to estimate my stories on time, but rather I'm going to estimate it in some sort of a ritual voodoo story points, which, depending on the company, can mean one thing or can mean another. So you could be delivering 20 story points a week or a sprint in one company and 2 in another. But then we try to estimate time. How does that work? Why don't you just estimate with time and, make sure that you are meeting the expectations, or you just, assume that you are not going to be on time, which is my preferred choice, and make sure that the people who are delivering have everything they need to deliver effectively and efficiently without, that pressure of we need to cut corners because now it's not going to work, or it's going to be too expensive, or it's like, I know many companies are budget constrained, but if you are budget constrained, which leads into time constraints, and therefore you have a hard deadline, you should not be looking into using Agile. You should be using a different sort of methodology, which it's going to allow you to exercise DevOps much better, because you will have a more clear view of the pipeline, and also work in a more consistent way.
So back to the point again about it's not a single approach. That's not what we're talking about here.
Not at all.
Fantastic. Okay, just in terms of questions, there's just a couple there. Will DevOps be replaced by something else soon?
Serverless. I don't think DevOps itself is going to be replaced by something else, because DevOps is not a thing. It's a set of practices and technologies. I think it's going to evolve, hopefully, where we don't need to set up a Kubernetes cluster for my company to work, but rather we create infrastructure from the ether, and you will say this is the cloud, but it's not, because I don't want to be dealing with virtual machines. I don't want to be dealing with networks. I don't want to be dealing with, many other things. I just want to have my manifest saying, I want 2 services, all of them private, connected to this public endpoint, connected to this database, and I want all the network traffic that they have not allowed listed to be dropped. Deploy that into the cloud, and happy days. And that is the way that Knative is going to. But that's, if you see Google Cloud Run, it's basically selling Knative as a service. And I think that's going to grow. It's not going to get back. It's going to grow up to a point where all the providers are going to have a very similar implementation, and it's going to allow us to focus more on the business problem rather than in the details, which are always tricky. So
that's interesting in itself. That here you are, a DevOps guy, and you're talking about focusing on the business problems. I mean, if there's a better description of what it's all about at the end of the day, I can't think.
Like a DevOps guy like me, it's to technology what a management consultant is to business, but the other way around.
Ooh,
so
that's good.
I mean, like that's from Alex Knoll as well. Hi, Alex. So when I jump into an organization, into a project, the first thing I look for is not what technology are you running your applications on. How are you organizing your teams, and what do you want to achieve with this organization? And then I will tell you if that makes sense, or we need to reorganize the teams to be more efficient.
Brilliant. I think we should leave it on that note, because we've run way over. So thanks a million, guys. I found that incredibly valuable. It's like every time I talk to this pair, I learn something new. I love that. I hope everyone can join us next month. So next month is a really, really interesting one. We have Technical Director Katie Roberts, and we have Delivery Architect Simone Busoli, and they're talking about kind of accelerating software delivery, and that's kind of digging in. We've just been talking about processes and principles and how we accelerate development at Nearform. So, hopefully we'll be able, we've been pulling this thread all the way through all of these episodes of Decode, and I think we'll continue to do so with that episode. It's on the 3rd of June. Hope to see you there. And thanks again, David and Matteo. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.